Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm your host, Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Eric Devin and Football Radar's Adam White. The new Ligue 1 season kicked off on Friday evening, and they started with a bang as we saw 26 goals in 10 games, with some teams proving their season hype, while others slumped under great expectations. But before we talk all about the action at the weekend, here are the latest headlines. Paris Saint-Germain started the Ligue 1 season off with a gritty win away to Bastia, needing 71 minutes to score against the hosts as Layvin Kurzawa turned in a rebound from a shot by Hesse to provide the 1-0 margin. Also on Friday evening, Monaco hosted Guingamp, and thanks to a cracking strike from Mustafa Diallo and another by Sloan Privat, the visitors took a 2-0 lead. Monaco battled back, courtesy of a Bernardo Silva. The diminutive Portuguese won a penalty converted by Fabinho, and the deflected equaliser 6 minutes from time as the match finishes 2-2. Saturday's early match saw a battle between two European hopefuls as injury hit Saint-Etienne visited Bordeaux. New manager Jocelyn Gourvenec's young side earning a 3-2 win in a sloppy but entertaining match. In the multiplex, René Girard's debut as Nantes manager saw Les Canaries play with an attacking verve not often seen under their former manager, and while they might rue some missed chances, Nicolas Thompson's diving header early in the second half was enough to see a victory away at Dijon. Caen, meanwhile, beat 10-man Lorient at home 3-2, new signing Ivan Santini notching a brace on his debut to cancel out 2 goals from Les Merlus' Benjamin Mukanjo. Montpellier exacted revenge on Angers for last season's loss, coming out on top at the Stade Mousson, as the two teams met for the second season running in the opening match. Riyad Boudibou's superb solo effort, the difference in a 1-0 victory. Metz, though, picked up the surprise result of the weekend as they won 3-2 at home over Lille, with braces from both Lille's Ronnie Lopez and the hosts Mevla Erding, before a late penalty converted by Jan Jouffre provided the final margin. Sunday's matches were a little less lively, and Lyon never really got beyond cruise control as Alexandre Lacazette's hat-trick powered the visitors to a 3-0 win at Nancy. A sombre match in remembrance of the victims of last month's terrorist attacks saw host Nice, under new manager Lucien Favre, spoil the debut of Rennes manager Christian Gourcuff, a set-piece goal by youngster Malang Sarr, the difference in a 1-0 win. Marseille hosted Toulouse in the weekend's final match, and it was much of the same at the Velodrome. The visitors always looking the more likely as the theme of dropped points at home continued in a scoreless draw. In Ligue 2, Le Havre missed a chance to pull clear at the top in a 1-1 draw at Gazan Ajaccio, joining Brest, Sochaux, and promoted Strasbourg on 7 points at the top of the division. In injury news, Paris Saint-Germain's Hesse is out for a month with appendicitis, while Lyon revealed a surprise major investment in the team by a Chinese group. And that's all for the news for now, but remember, if you want to keep up to date with everything to do with French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening with the champions who kicked everything off on Friday evening in Bastia. The game wasn't the only thing that kicked off, and we will get to chat about that later on. But Adam, what do you think to PSG's performance?
It was interesting. It's difficult to say how Emery's going to sort of affect that team. I've been thinking a lot as if he's going to be radical. Is there going to be a huge difference between Blanc's PSG and Emery's PSG? But I felt like it was kind of evolution rather than revolution. Obviously, it's only the first game in which he's taken charge competitively, so it's not like he's going to be changing things overnight. Despite having a free season, it's going to be sort of over the course of the next few months. He's going to sort of mould that team, but I think one of the main things I noticed a lot more is that they kept the ball on the ground a lot more. They tried to play their way out of trouble as Bastia pressed them quite a lot, especially in fullback areas and defensive areas. They played their way out of trouble most of the time quite nicely. But overall, it was kind of the classic PSG Ligue 1 performance in that they're playing a team either at home or away who sat in, were looking to hit them on the counter attack to defend, and they had to pick them off and break them down. And I thought when Hesse came on, his sort of verve kind of changed the game a little bit, created the opening for Kazawa's goal, and it felt a little bit like the standard PSG performance. But is there anywhere else they can really go from that? I don't know if Emery's going to be the person to change them so much that they're tearing those teams apart all the time when they sit so deep. So I think it's a good start, but I think there's a lot more to come from them.
Eric, they picked a very similar side to they had the weekend before in the Trophée des Champions, but one person I wanted to mention is Adrien Rabiot, who got the nod ahead of Blaise Matuidi and Marco Verratti, who began the game on the bench. What did you think to his performance?
Oh, I thought Rabiot was fantastic. I think that his movement, his energy, his ability to run with the ball at his feet and drive from midfield, I think gave a lot of impetus to PSG's attack. I think that he also provides adequate cover for Thiago Motta. Again, you know, that this is a player who's about to be 34 and has had an excellent career, but let's face it, isn't the fleetest of foot. And with the pace of the likes of Diallo and Saint-Maximin on the wings, it was definitely necessary to have somebody who was willing to break up play and also to be physical enough to help battle with the likes of Enzo Crivelli. So yeah, a fantastic match for Rabiot. I mean, let's face it, the sort of up-tempo, energetic style that Unai Emery plays means that rotation is going to be necessary. And if he does adhere to this 4-2-3-1, this just gives him another option. So you've got Krychowiak, you've got Verratti, you've got Rabiot, and I think you'll have to look at Emery adapting a situation in terms of who starts based on the magnitude of a given match or how an opponent might set up as to which one of those players might be more appropriate to play at a given time. I think that we can look at Verratti having had a positive impact on the match when he came on, but as he sort of wends his way back into fitness, I think that starting Rabiot, at least for the next few matches, alongside either Mata or Krychowiak, probably makes the most sense. A really impressive performance from the youngster.
Yes, especially played in front of the two players that are very much more senior than him. Adam, you briefly mentioned Hesse's performance there earlier, and when he came on, he added that extra verve to them. I wanted to talk about Hatem Ben Arfa and in that false nine role that he kind of operated in. He struggled to really get into the game, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. It's interesting, like how the Ben Arfa situation is going to evolve at PSG, because obviously he was incredibly good at Nice last season, like tore up the league. He was amazing, but whether he can make that transition from being the big fish in the small pond to just one of many very similar sort of players or very similar level. I mean, people like Lucas Moura and Hesse, they're all on par, if you like. I'm not sure he's going to be a success. The more I watch PSG in pre-season, the Trophée des Champions, and yesterday, I feel like perhaps he's trying a little bit too hard. Perhaps he's been a little bit wayward, overhit passes, and he doesn't necessarily look like he's going to have the same effect on the league as he had at Nice. Obviously, in that squad, he's not going to be as important just because they've got better players. But I'm a little bit worried that the Ben Arfa that we're seeing is tending towards the Premier League, Newcastle, Hull Ben Arfa than it is the Nice one. Obviously, he's still a great player. Still, obviously, got fantastic talent, and he will still, he will still have moments of brilliance this season. But I think Emery said he doesn't want to play him wide. Obviously, he played potentially for Nice, so it makes sense to play him potentially for PSG as well. It's the same league, but in the way that they play, you would have expected him to be moved out wide relatively soon. But he said he doesn't really fancy him in terms of his defensive coverage. And I don't know if a false nine role really suits his style of play. I think he wants perhaps a little more of the game in front of him to affect it a little bit more. So I liked him at sort of attacking midfield, and they played him there in pre-season a little bit. That makes a little bit more sense. But I think he's a bit stranded. I'm not sure he's that type of player that you want to play as your sort of furthest man forward. I don't know if he's got the nous to play that position, but it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But I mean, will he last in the first 11? I'm not sure he will.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting now. Hesse's out for a month with that appendicitis, and Cavani's still maybe out for another couple of weeks. So we'll see how that situation develops as it carries on. But I briefly touched on it, Eric, in the intro that there was a strange incident with the crowd in the second half and Lucas, and it turned into a very strange debate on Twitter. If you've not seen it, I would go and search it. Lucas by what seems like almost like a bamboo stick, let's say a thin one, and it strikes him on the head as he's about to take a corner. Now, Bastia's own Twitter feed placed a thing where they believed Lucas had dived. Now, there's a camera angle where it looks unconvincing of where whether it hits Lucas or not, and then later on in the evening there was another angle shown, and it clearly shows him being struck by this I'll say bamboo stick. It's not that thick, but this kind of instrument. What did you think to that, Eric? It was a very strange moment, and it held the game up for a bit, and then the reaction afterwards was peculiar from a football club.
Yeah, we like to talk about the fiery character that football tends to have in Corsica, but I think on the occasion this was, very unbecoming of a professional club. I think that regardless of what Lucas was actually hit, I think he was hit. I watched the match. Seeing it in real time and seeing it in replay, there's no doubt to me that he's struck by an object. I know Lucas as a player, has on occasion had the reputation for diving on the field of play, but there was also an immediate reaction from the crowd if you watch to identify the person who had done this, and that to me speaks volumes to the fact that he was actually struck by an object. Bastia's response, they released a statement today that they're calling it quote unquote ridiculous. They continue to refer to Lucas's act as simulation. This is again on Bastia's official website. I appreciate the atmosphere at the Fioriani. I appreciate that you watch a match that's being broadcast from there, but the issues that this club have had, it can't come at the expense of players. Even if there is a certain level of animosity between PSG and Bastia, dating back to the Coupe de la Ligue in 2015, there's still no excuses for this sort of behavior. I'm just reading this piece on their website right now, and they go through different examples of how they feel they're being targeted. It's really. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but it's really
Islanders mentality, isn't it?
Yeah, the club I can't imagine, a club of the level of Marseille or someone else doing that. I'm not saying that Bastia have a small time mentality, but I think to have the club take an official response in this is really disturbing. You might see someone like Vincent Lebrun or Jean-Michel Aulas, make some comments about fan trouble following Marseille-Lyon last year, for example, but you're not. For the club itself to make this sort of statement rather than an individual, I think is pretty disturbing, and I think that Bastia should be facing some sort of sanctions, if not for the behavior of the fans, then for their own response to this.
Yeah, it was a very peculiar situation that arose, and the video they've shown is not convincing at all. And the second angle is absolutely certain. You can see the object hit him and vibrate after it's hit him and everything like that. It's uncompromisingly convincing, and they still seem to proceed on their way. But let's concentrate on Bastia on the field, Adam, and they put up a decent performance, especially in the first half. What did you think to them?
Yeah, I thought they looked good. Bastia are a team that, in footballing terms anyway, that I've always sort of appreciated, because every season I start looking at the relegation candidates, and I think, well, Bastia could be in trouble. But then I remember how good they are at home and how many results they get there, what a fortress what their home ground is. So I think with Crivelli up front, Alan Saint-Maxime was brilliant in the first half. Pace, taking on his man, causing a lot of danger. I think perhaps Crivelli was played to try and bully Kimpembe a little bit, which didn't necessarily work. But he's a player that I'm surprised Bordeaux didn't hold on to this season, because they've obviously sent him out on loan. Because I think he's a good player. I think he could develop into a really good player, and he scores different types of goals when he gets the opportunity. And I think he's going to be great for Bastia. But as a sort, I think they'll follow the standard Bastia narrative in that they'll be terrible away from home, but they'll get enough wins at home to finish sort of 13th, 14th, like lower mid-table. And they look good. They look like they're going to cause some people some upsets on Corsica this season. Especially with I love Kawazak. He's fantastic. He's just so combative. Everything annoys him. He's always looking to sort of get into some sort of war with his direct opponent, and they're that kind of, as you mentioned, they're that kind of team, and perhaps even that kind of club that there's a siege mentality there, and it works for them. So I think they'll be fine again this season, and perhaps Cavelli can get a few goals and go back to Bordeaux an improved player.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Kawazak at the weekend. I thought he had a really good game, and their defence was really solid as well, especially against what we know is a very exciting PSG attack. And you've already mentioned him, Alexander Saint-Maximin had an excellent game. I mean, we've not seen him play. I don't think I've seen him play at that level since maybe one of the appearances back at Saint-Etienne. But it's great to see him back in Ligue 1 after a disappointing spell at Hanover where they barely played him. And hopefully he can kick on to the next level and hopefully be a part of that Monaco side in a couple of years. But we'll move on to another team keen to show their strength on opening weekend, and that was Lyon, who never really have to. You mentioned it in the news that they didn't have to shift out of first gear against newly promoted Nancy as they won 3-0, which included a hat-trick from none other than Alexandre Lacazette. Eric, what did you think to Bruno Genesio's side in that one?
Again, I watched the match, covered it for our Match Zone. It's at GFFN Match Zone. We try and get over most of the matches over a given weekend. But to start out with, the match was being played during the heat of the day, so there were a couple cooling breaks. Before the first cooling break, Lyon really did not look that impressive. Anthony Robic and Anthony Cura looked like they were giving the backline quite a bit of problems, and it frankly made me nervous because Lyon weren't really creating any solid openings. But after the cooling break returned, Lyon looked suitably G'd up, and Lacazette just had some really lovely finishes. Nabil Fekir, still not at his best, but showed a lot of drive and movement, some good interplay with Raphael, and and likewise Maxwell Cornet. Both these players are really adept at running with the ball at their feet and creating space and stretching play for Lacazette. And Gonalon was superb in front of the defense, and the center back pairing really seemed to grow into the match as well. I think that's something again, in particular the center back pairing, that they're going to have to kind of build on. And we had in Samuel Umtiti a really remarkable center back as someone who could go with the ball at his feet and deliver long passes. Neither Nkulu or Yanga Mbiwa is really that sort of player. So there's going to be, despite their considerable achievements, having both been senior internationals for their respective countries at different points in their career, winning titles, but there's going to be a necessary level of adjustment as the team move on from the departure of Umtiti and the way that he could give dynamism from central defense. And as these two players develop a rapport with each other, I think that Lyon's defense will continue to improve, and there'll be less nervy moments, as it were. I think that there were a couple shots that Nancy had that with some better finishing could have taken the lead.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on, Eric. I didn't mean to.
No, that's just what I would say. That I think if the defense can continue to improve, I mean, they'll have what I think is a very stern test on Friday against Caen. Then I think Lyon can, are looking pretty good at this point in the season. I mean, again, they really didn't have to make too much of an effort to score 3 goals, and unless somebody puts in a stunning bid for Lacazette to take him away, they're looking quite a bit better than they were last Monday after the Trophée des Champions.
Yeah, and it was a very hot day, and on that 4G pitch, it was a kind of peculiar game, especially in those first 30 minutes. But you've already mentioned him, Eric, and that's the man, Alexandre Lacazette, and he's been linked here, there, and everywhere, especially at Arsenal, Adam. He's mentioned this week that on Canal Plus he was interviewed, and he said, if an offer comes in that one cannot refuse, I don't want to refuse them. If not, I'm happy at Lyon. He was then asked if he had received any offers since the one rejected at Arsenal last month. He said, ask the president. And they said, his reply, they rejected it, and he said, if the president says I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. So he's keeping his cards close to his chest, shall we say that nicely. Do you think he'll be still there at the end of the window, Adam?
It's definitely mixed messages a little bit, isn't it, from Lacazette? That I think, from his point of view, if someone like if like a really massive club came in, if someone like Barcelona have been looking for a forward, perhaps to complement their front three, if someone like Real Madrid, if someone one of those really massive clubs, he couldn't say no, and I don't think Lyon could refuse either if they're getting bids of 40 million plus. But I think something like Arsenal's a different kettle of fish entirely. I mean, would you want to play in the Premier League? Yes, I think you would. But are Arsenal the right club to go to at the moment? Is Arsenal even a step up from Lyon? I'm not sure that they are, to be honest. It might be. Well, there's obviously other factors in terms of just playing in the Premier League or just wages as well. I imagine Arsenal could offer him a lot more money, and that might be something that's a factor. But I have a feeling he'll stay. I think Olas might stick to his guns and keep refusing these massive offers from West Ham and from Arsenal as long as he can, because I think from his point of view, he can make the case that Lyon is a better place to be than Arsenal at the moment, given their group stages of the Champions League, obviously Arsenal as well. But he's going to have that for this season at least. He's on form. Fekir's back in the side. They could cause some waves in the Champions League and make it out of the group possibly. Whereas Arsenal, it's becoming a more sort of toxic atmosphere at the Emirates at the moment with the two sides of the fan base. Wenger out and Wenger should stay. No signings really apart from Xhaka in the summer. They haven't addressed any of their issues. They seem like they're going to follow the same Arsenal kind of narrative, and they'll get to February and have 3 really important games in a row in 3 different competitions, and they'll lose all 3 of them probably. But it's a close call between the two, and I think unless maybe a bigger club came in for him, I think Olas would refuse, and Lacazette would be okay with that, and I think he will stay.
Yeah, prepare for those Arsenal fans to come after you, Adam, if you call it. The clubs are bigger than them, I think. But Eric, I wanted to talk to you about this one as well. It would be a massive fee, really, if to tempt Lacazette away. It would have to be that 50 million euros. Can you see a team paying that really before the transfer window closes?
Well, no. I'll tell you why. Because if Lacazette can have a season like he had 2 seasons ago and score 27 goals, maybe not that amount again, but 20 or 25 goals and look good doing it. Let's face it, he had 20 goals last season, but especially towards the back end of the season, the quality of those goals wasn't as high as it was when he was playing with Fekir 2 seasons ago. Now that he's got Fekir back, he's got another season of development and growth from the likes of Darder, Cornet, Tolisso. I think that we could see Lacazette really stake his claim to be the best player in Liga. Now, if that happens, and I do believe that will be the case, Lacazette can also have a higher level of success in the Champions League. I think we could be talking a fee that's more 70, 80 million euros next summer. Should Lyon hold on to him and his value continue to develop? In a positive manner. I mean, let's face it. 2015-16 versus 2014-15. Last season, I think showed a little bit of a drop off in form, and yes, the tactical switch and managerial switch were a factor in that. But the fact remains that the money that's being offered for Lacazette now, because of the money that's continually coming into the Premier League, is much higher. And if the Premier League or Barcelona, Real Madrid, one of those clubs is a destination for Lacazette, that fee is only going to go up, barring a catastrophic injury. So I think that we've seen Olas, really stick to his guns over a lot of players. Michael Essien and Karim Benzema are the best examples in terms of getting the fee that he wants. And I think the club will hold on for another season, and given their past history, and sell Lacazette next summer, and for a fee that's perhaps 40 to 50% greater than what's being bandied about now.
If I'm Arsenal, I'm on the phone tomorrow and paying that amount and getting through the door. But I'm not Arsene Wenger, and he's not that excitable, shall we say? Let's talk about the depth of this squad, Adam. Really, at Lyon, because they struggled at times when players were injured last season, especially in that midway point. With Fekir coming back, with a couple of extra signings, do they look deep enough to possibly challenge PSG this season?
I think they are good enough to challenge PSG. Whether they're deep enough is another question. I think we saw when Leicester won the league last year in the Premier League that they got through the most of the season without any injuries to their major players. I think if Lyon are going to challenge this season, that they're going to need to do something similar. Obviously, it's a lot of luck involved there, but the return of Nabil Fekir, if he can hit the form he did in the previous season when he was really brilliant. I often say to my friends that if you sign someone from Lyon, you sign Fekir because he's such a good player. If they can retain that partnership, then his inclusion in the side, Lacazette staying fit, both of them staying fit, keeping Gonalons and Tolisso fit, then yes, they can challenge PSG. But whether they've got the depth, if those 4 players get injured, Lissandro Lopez as well. Anthony Lopez as well. Well, Lissandro Lopez is going back a bit. Then perhaps they don't have the depth of squad to maintain a challenge on both European and domestic fronts. I know they've got people like Valbuena, Cornet, Gazal, they're good players, but I don't know if they're they're not the type of players that are going to take you to a league and victory, whereas I think Lacazette and Fekir potentially, if things go their way, they could definitely challenge, but they don't have the players to replace them, and it'll be a struggle if either one of them gets injured, as we saw last season with Fekir. That was a big factor in their poor season. Obviously, other factors as well with Fournier's demise, but even so, I think they need to keep their best players fit. If they do, Emery, new league, PSG, perhaps I think PSG will be better in Europe, but worse in Ligue 1. Perhaps it could be close coming into the season. So keep players fit, and they'll be there or thereabouts, but without them, they struggle.
Just a brief word on Nancy in that game, Eric. It's their first game back in Ligue 1, obviously, after a couple of seasons away. They'll have easier games, we'll say that for starters, but they weren't completely convincing of really creating a threat in the opposition half, were they?
No, I think that Anthony Cora showed a lot of good moments in the first half, but really disappeared as the match wore on. Junior Dale was rightly replaced at halftime by Christophe Mandan. Anthony Robic gave Jeremy Morel a fair bit of trouble as well. And so, I mean, there's potential there in the forward line, and they've got a nice combative midfield with Serge Nguessan and Youssef Ait Benesser. So, again, I think they were the team that people had looked at as being probably worse than Dijon, but better than Metz. And I think that, again, they played a much higher caliber of opponent than did either Metz and Dijon Metz and Dijon at the weekend, and the results shows that. But I think that, like the other two promoted teams, they're not going to be a Troyes or an RL Avignon that we've seen in the past few years and just get buried. I think there's certainly enough there, an aggressive midfield, decent attacking players, that they should be, again, relegation is still certainly a possibility, maybe even a likelihood, but it'd be somewhere along the lines of say, Gazlec getting relegated. So that's something that's not decided until the final week or two, rather than just being buried at the foot of the table.
Yeah, and let's see them next week when they possibly have maybe an easier game. But from one reported Arsenal target that we've already mentioned in Lacazette to another that we have some information on coming in from the GFFN news desk this evening on the future of Leicester City attacker Riyad Mahrez. According to sources contacted by GFFN, the Algerian internationals camp are increasingly pessimistic about a move away from the Foxes this summer, despite his continued desire to join an established member of the European elite. Arsenal have had at least one non-written offer rejected by Leicester for the player this summer, and remain in touch with the player's entourage, but do not appear ready to make the sort of offer of around the £50 million mark that would give Riyad Mahrez a feasible reason to bust his previous promise of not forcing a move away. Chelsea have also tried and failed in the recent weeks as well, and time is running out for both clubs, and Leicester are not budging for now. So we'll keep an eye on that. That's some interesting news for the Algerian and the Premier League. But we move on now to our Ligue 1 medley, which is a new section for the show, where with the other 8 games, obviously, of the weekend, we'll touch base on each of them as we take turns in talking briefly about each encounter. So I'll start with you, Eric, and Nantes' win at Dijon.
Yeah, what a great match. I mean, I think on paper, we would not have picked not given their recent history under Michel Deschakarian and given the managerial reputation of René Girard for being an overly defensive manager, as this being an exciting open match. But it really was. Not looked to have done really well in the transfer window. The signings of Lucas Lima at left back looks great. Nikolai Thompson obviously scored the goal, a great diving header. But not only those two, but the return of Valentin Rongier and the promotion of Amin Harit. I think that Nantes showed a great dynamism in midfield, a lot of movement, a lot of players really operating in freer roles, with Guillaume Gillet protecting the defense. Also, the new center back Diego Carlos looked pretty good. He's got enough energy and motor to help protect the slower Vizcarrondo. I'm not going to anoint Nantes a European contender, but it's really, really great. I have a soft spot for Nantes. You see a match at the Beaujoire, the atmosphere there looks fantastic, and to see them playing with an exciting attacking style, and to give a chance to some of these younger players and new arrivals right off the bat is a great credit to René Girard. I think that he's got a good chance here to make a positive recalibration of his image especially after the way his teams generally played at Lille. Dijon, also had their chances as well. I mean, Nantes are again well known for being a defensively solid team, and they were that again. But there were a couple good saves from Remy Rieu, the Nantes goalkeeper. I think that Dijon certainly have the tools that we've talked about in the past couple of weeks to again probably be the best of the three promoted teams. Florent Beaumont had a pretty good match playing balls over the top. Samaritano and Amalfitano, good movement, good attack. Samaritano, people have called him the poor man's Matthew Valbuena, and I think he lived up to that. Had a couple of really great moves cutting inside, and the defense looks pretty solid as well. So a pretty entertaining and an open match. I was really pleased that this was the match that I chose to watch, and so more power to both these teams that they can sort of resurrect their reputations, as it were, in terms of being an enjoyable watch for the neutral.
I'll move on to you, Adam, and an interesting game that we pinpointed on the preview show as possibly being a cracker, and it was in Bordeaux and Saint-Etienne.
Yeah, it really was. It was a fantastic game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm so excited about Bordeaux this season. After last season's sort of dismal run of going out of the Europa League pretty limply and all their injuries and Sagnol's sacking, which was unfortunate but I think necessary at the time, they look so exciting this season. And considering they didn't start with Menez or Unas or Camano, and they was or Toulalan, of course, who was suspended, they were brilliant going forward. I thought Malcolm had a great game. I think this is the season for him, bearing in mind he came in the winter and was sort of easing his way a little bit, obviously moving from Brazil as a 20-year-old to France is a big change. He's going to take a while to settle in, but now he's had that half season under his belt. I think he could be a really exciting player this season. I thought he had some great moments in that game with him and Unas and Jerry Menez behind Diego Roland, possibly. That's a really exciting front four, and they proved that they could play with a sort of attacking verve in this game, which I think Gourvenec will at least try in spells to sort of for that team to sort of coalesce like that. So I thought they dominated for long stretches, and Saint-Etienne with the standard Saint-Etienne performance with Gautier's very pragmatic style, and their three in midfield didn't really get their teeth into the game, didn't really get forward to support Robert Beric. And I was actually really impressed with Gaëtan Laborde for Bordeaux as well. I thought his header was brilliant, and they looked like a really exciting proposition. They were sloppy, as you mentioned in the build-up. It was a sloppy game overall, and once they got that 3-0 lead, Saint-Etienne did fight their way back in, and towards the end it was very exciting. They could have got a sort of an undeserved draw, in my opinion. I don't even know where their 2 goals came from. I'm not sure they were worth those 2 goals, but Mouma was disappointing. Tanan, although he shows flashes of skill, I don't know if his end product is probably an issue with him, and that was probably shown at the weekend a little bit. But great performance from Bordeaux for an hour or so, and hopefully they can maintain the consistency going forward. Saint-Etienne, I've said it before on the previous show we do on Thursdays, but I fear for them, and I fear for Gautier a little bit this season. So hopefully that when they come to this weekend's fixture, they can turn it around a little bit, and that forward line needs to be far more effective and needs to have far more support than they got in this game. But an exciting game, one of 3-3-2s, and it was great to see the goals going in. Bordeaux were good. They should be exciting this year.
Yeah, and another team we'll move on to that but should be challenging in those European spots is Monaco, as they hosted Guingamp on Friday evening, and it was a peculiar game in all honesty, because Monaco started really slowly and allowed Guingamp into the game, and they were great in the first half. I thought you should search out Mustafa Diallo's strike. It's an absolute corker. And Coco, he puts a ball across and it takes a slight deflection and it lifts up slightly just in front of him. He allows it to bounce and he absolutely smashes into the top corner. It's a great finish. And that sort of shell-shocked Monaco, because Guingamp were really in the ascendancy again, and it was down that right-hand side they came again. And it's again, you should see the goal for Privat and Doe, the centre midfielder. He starts it off by making a great challenge in the middle, does a storming run, plays it to Coco, plays it back to him, and he puts a wonderful ball into the back post for Privat. It's an absolutely superb goal. And then you're thinking that this is Guingamp's to lose, and they do, because of that man that we always mention, and that's Bernardo Silva. He came on and completely changed the game. It was because of an injury, unfortunately, to Kylian Mbappe that he came on so early, in about a half-hour mark. But he completely changed the complexion of this game. He got maybe a lucky goal for the equaliser, and the penalty is definitely a penalty against him. He earns it by being tripped. And I was thinking this during the game, that they cannot afford to not play him in midweek against Villarreal. They've got a real chance in that game, with them a little bit turned upside down with Marcelino offering his resignation and leaving the club last week. They're a little up in the air, and we said that might be a side they'd struggle against, but that's a real opportunity that Monaco need to take, especially with French football where they are. But we'll move on now to another interesting game in Liga, and that was the one in Caen, and another 3-2, Eric, against Lorient.
Yeah, I mean, what a performance from Caen. I think that we had talked earlier about myself. I'll hold up my hand. I had quite a few doubts about Caen's ability to attack, the loss of Annie Delors and the physicality and energy that he brings to the center forward role in that 4-1-4-1. The aging of Nicolas Seux, but Patrice Garand shuffled things around. He moved Damien De Silva forward from central defense into defensive midfielder role. De Silva had played there at youth levels, and I think looked pretty comfortable in that role. And Santini, wow, he's got the physicality, the energy, the effort. He's not quite as refined a tackler as is. Pardon me, as is.
Delors, is it?
Yes, as is Delors. My apologies. But I think on the whole it was a pretty impressive effort from Caen. They showed a real ability to have continuity with that system and look great. I mean, obviously they're benefiting somewhat from the dismissal of Torre, and they looked sort of at 6s and 7s. But I think that the confidence that they're going to gain from coming behind is something that's really important for them going forward, and they know that they can play this system even with the losses of key personnel. I think will make them again. Certainly not the relegation candidate that I was thinking of last week. I certainly did not give Caen's transfer team enough credit. Lorient, I think they should take enough positives from the way that the first half hour played out prior to Torres' dismissal. Suck that up and know that they're doing the right thing, and they're going to be a fun team to watch going forward. But are probably going to score 55 goals and concede 56. Another mid-table season for them, I would have to guess.
Yeah, it was a strange one for Lorient, and a poorly timed red card that really derailed them. But Adam, maybe a surprise result of the weekend of Montpellier's win against Angers. I mean, we expected Angers to be pretty good this season.
Yeah, it was interesting because this was the game that started off Angers' run last season away at Montpellier, where they turned up on the first day. No one really expected too much of them, and they went on 1-2-0. Sheikh Ndoye was brilliant on that day. I think Angers are an interesting proposition. I love covering them. They're one of my favourite teams just because they sort of come from nowhere. And they did really well last season by signing like Ligue 2 players. They sort of picked off the best players that they saw anyway from Ligue 2. And they've kind of done a similar thing this season with Santa Maria coming in and De Gea obviously coming in as top scorer in Ligue 2 last season. Toko Ekambi as well coming in from Sochaux. And I think they're perhaps a little bit reliant on how those players are going to perform. De Gea being the key one, obviously making it through last season as top scorer with 21 goals in Ligue 2 is fantastic. But that's the type of player that Angers are looking for. They need the goals. They managed to do what they did last season, but without a striker. With the whole season they've played Billy Ekekam from Foni up front, Sunu wide. Dore got injured very early in the season. That they were looking for those goals, and I think the early signs aren't great in terms of that changing this season. I don't know if De Gea was the force they were hoping he was going to be. Bearing in mind his form trailed off at Clermont last season quite a lot towards the end of the year. So I think the jury is very much still out on Angers, but they still played relatively well. There just wasn't that cutting edge. I think the difference in that game between the two sides was Riyad Boudebouz. He was brilliant. As you mentioned in the build-up, Nathan, his goal was fantastic. He dominated the game and stood out in virtually every exchange, and he was by far the best player on the pitch. He just looks so calm, so sort of skillful. That sort of kind of almost languid, but sort of silky kind of style he's got, where he sort of flicks the ball with the outside of his foot. That back heel he did in the first half. Without him, Montpellier would be a far worse team, I think. And they better be hoping that they can keep hold of him before the September the 2nd, or the end of the transfer window. Without him, they'd be in trouble, I think. But I thought it was a decent game, and Montpellier, based on Boudebouz's performance, probably deserved to win it. But Angers, they'll be relatively pleased with how it went, despite the defeat. They didn't look like their level had dropped too much from last season, and I think they'll be okay this year. But it's just whether they can get the best out of Santa Maria and De Gea and keep Ndoye on form. Obviously, the loss of Saiss and Mangani was huge for this game, both injured. And when they come back in, they'll have far more control over the midfield. But then that doesn't really solve the goal issue. So I think that the jury's still out. They'll be okay, but whether they can replicate last season's form is very much open for debate.
Yeah, and do check out that Boudebouz goal. It's an excellent finish. It reminded me a little bit of Sadio Mane's goal at the weekend, where it's sort of a flat, well hit strike from a left foot cutting in, but it's a superb goal. But we'll move on to Metz Lille, which was a really entertaining game in the second half. Really, it was a bit of a struggle for the promoted side in the first half. They really struggled to string together opportunities that they could get Mevla Erding into the game, or the attacking players really into advanced positions. And Lille took advantage of that with a good goal from Ronnie Lopez that's maybe a little bit difficult on Metz to take, especially straight in front of the goalkeeper. But they replied as quickly as they could in the second half with a very similar goal really from Erding. And from that point on, both sides strangely lifted the game. Ronnie Lopez scored his second, and from there you think Lille would push on. But I thought the substitutions from Metz at the weekend, I thought Ismaili Sarr and Habib Diallo, who earned both the penalties scored by Erding and Jouffre, really came on and added something to Metz that we'd struggled to see in that first half. They added an extra dimension to them. They were willing to run with the ball a little bit more than we'd seen in the first half, and advance them a little bit further into the half, and it earned them the win in the end. And it's a great win for them. I mean, we're mentioning that Metz are probably the weaker of the three promoted sides on paper, but getting a result against Lille on the opening day will hopefully do wonders for their confidence, and heading forward they'll be an interesting side to watch. But my worries about Lille about scoring weren't the issue in this game. It was the lack of concentration in the defence for the two penalties, because they're definitely penalties. And Yemers, for the final one, you can't really blame a goalkeeper as much for that one, because he has to try and make those challenges and hope the player doesn't reach the ball beforehand. But they fell asleep a little bit, and they can't afford to do that in the next couple of games. They can't afford a sloppy start to the season again like they did last season if they want to challenge for Europe again. Eric, your final game was the really interesting one, and it was a beautiful scene beforehand and during the game of the white shirts in memory of the people we lost in Nice this summer, and the lovely tributes to them, and they're auctioning off the shirts as well in that game to add to charity for that, which is a great gesture by both clubs. But let's talk about what was a really interesting game with a very, very young Nice side.
Yeah, I think the game was a little bit low on quality. Perhaps down to the occasion that both teams were not going to come out as fired up as you necessarily would for a season opener. Rennes were probably the better team, had some good chances striking the woodwork at one point. But I think that with this young team, and again Ricardo Pereira, Maxime Le Marchand still to come back from injury, I think that Nice showed a lot of promise and a lot of talent. That the fact that Favre is willing to toss the keys to these young players, as you will, is really impressive. And I think he still maybe needs to play with the system a little bit more to figure out how to get the best out of Seri and Coziello from open play. Giving them a little bit more, free reign seems like it would make a bit more sense. But and Alassane Plea was a little bit disappointing in the central striker role for me. I thought I've tipped him to have a big season, and I think that he's got some work to do. I think that maybe some of what he did last season was the benefit of playing alongside the likes of Germain and Hatem Ben Arfa. So a level of cogency in attack, I think, is still escaping Nice, but on the whole, a really solid defensive effort. Paul Bice was fantastic. It's not a phrase we've used often in the past, but I think that now that he's posed to be a veteran leader of this team, I think he looks really strong. And the youngster Sarr alongside him managed to keep Rennes quiet. Clean sheets, definitely going to be a boost in confidence for that back line. And then for Rennes, again, still getting some players back from injuries themselves. I think that the likes of Pedro Enrique, Maxer, and Tep are going to help this team grow and move forward. But they've got a home match against Nancy at the weekend, so that'll probably be an easier result for them. I still think Rennes look a strong candidate to finish among the European places this season. They were probably unlucky to get at least a point at the weekend, but Gorku's the kind of manager who'll be able to take that in stride and build from what's in contrast to Nice, quite a veteran team.
Yeah, and credit to Malang Sarr, the young centre-back who scored the winner, 17 years old. It must have been a good weekend for him. I hope he went and celebrated that. It was fantastic to see. And we finish off the games now with the final game of the weekend, in fact, on Sunday, which was Marseille-Toulouse. It probably lived up to the expectations we had, didn't it, Adam?
Yeah, I made the mistake of picking this game as the game of the week on Football Radar's podcast, which I regretted almost immediately as the game kicked off. It was a very drab, very dire game, and Marseille sort of playing in front of a half-full velodrome with the season ticket subscription down, and it was just a very eerie, kind of depressing atmosphere at the velodrome. I feel for some Marseille fans this season. I think it might not get much better than it did last time around. Even though they've got talent in their team, it could be worrying for them. But I think that the closest they came to scoring is Cabela hit the post outside the foot shot from just inside the area, which is probably the moment of the game, the only thing they really had to shout about. I thought Toulouse looked like the better side for a lot of the match, and they looked like they had a game plan. They equipped themselves well. They did, when they had the ball, they used it relatively well going forward in comparison to their opponents. At least they had those weird corner routines where they'd all stand on the edge of the area and they'd all look like they're doing the Zaza penalty, and they'd all sort of run and then split off into different directions, which was quite interesting. But you can tell that Pascal Dupraz, he's got ideas and he's going to put them into practice, and that will serve him well over the course of the season. And I think that if Toulouse can perform like they did yesterday, they're going to win games, especially at home. So I think that they could be fine this season. But it was such a poor game in terms of quality and in terms of excitement that Marseille fans would be very disappointed with their side. Can they improve based on the talent they've got in that front six? You'd have to say they should, but that completely new back four looks relatively. Well, they kept a clean sheet, but people like Doria looked relatively shaky. Sakai's crosses, although he got forward well and he's a willing runner, I don't know that he's got the quality to replace. Not that JJ had the quality on crosses either, but whether he's going to be an upgrade onto JJ is unlikely. So I think they've got a lot of work to do. Toulouse look okay, but going ahead, it's going to be interesting for both sides. But I was very disappointed in performance of both teams. I think the most exciting thing in the game was that Abu Dhabi made it for an hour of football without getting injured, which was a surprise to everybody watching. But I'm very happy that he's back in Ligue 1, because when he's a good player, when he's on form, we've barely seen it, but when it happens, he's very good. And I thought he had a decent game yesterday, and looked like, touch wood, his fitness is returning, and given the chance on the ball, he was assured and picked the right pass. So hopefully he'll be one to watch over the season, assuming he can stay fit. So unfortunate for Marseille, I fear for them, but Toulouse, they look good.
Yeah, and that might be a sign of the apocalypse. I think DRB is managing an hour of football for the first time in what seemed like forever, at least. But yeah, it was an excellent weekend of football. We saw plenty of goals, but we finished this evening with probably the biggest news story of the summer, especially in the transfer window, which was Paul Pogba's world record move to Manchester United. The fee, depending on who you ask, is between about 8 to 9 million and 100 million pounds. But Eric, what do you think to the move overall?
Yeah, I think that Manchester United, honestly, at this point, really needed to do this. I mean, let's look at the other players who are classed as some of the top players in world football. Cristiano Ronaldo, Gareth Bale, Luis Suarez, Neymar, Messi. Are any of those players leaving their teams anytime soon? No. Manchester United wanted to make a statement of intent and get the best player that was out there, and that's what they did with Pogba. There's still, obviously, despite a creditable win from whenever I didn't watch the match. I'm sure you did, Nathan. At the weekend against Bournemouth, I think there's still some tactical issues to be worked out into exactly how Pogba fits in with the team and relates to his teammates. So going forward from that, there's I think a lot of interest surrounding this player, and deservedly so. I think used correctly and given the right amount of freedom, he can light the Premier League up just the same way he's done it in Serie A.
Yeah, it was an interesting game at the weekend. Man United were good but not great is probably the best way to describe it. But looking at that formation, there's been talk, Adam, of where he might play. Maybe people were mentioning that maybe Matt or Rooney might have to drop off the side if he was to play number 10. But where do you see him fitting in the first 11?
I think it's pretty clear that Mourinho wants to play that 4-2-3-1, and he's really still captain, and he's come out and said if Rooney Rooney will play as a number 10, a number 9, or a 9.5, and he won't be playing in midfield. And I don't see Rooney dropping back into that midfield. But the thing with Pogba, I think he prefers to play as he did at Juve in that 3-5-2 as part of a 3. So whether the Rooney ends up having to drop back is open to debate. I think Mourinho sees him as perhaps the player to play alongside Carrick or Schneiderlin in midfield. I think he's the ultimate Mourinho sort of player. He's the ultimate dynamic midfielder with so much talent, so much skill, so much energy, so much power and strength that he's the perfect Mourinho sort of midfielder. It's interesting how United are lining up with Mkhitaryan hasn't started yet. I think Lingard's been playing out there. He was injured the weekend, and Mata came in ahead of him. And I don't see, obviously, Pogba's going to play centrally. But it's just whether Mourinho can mould that team into what he wants, and I think Pogba has to be central to that. I think this is Mourinho's doing, as well as it being a Man United sort of Ed Woodward style kind of commercial thing. I think this is Mourinho driven. This is the player he wanted. So the team is going to end up being built around Paul Pogba. So I think he'll end up playing in one of those two in midfield, and Mourinho will try and mould him into more like the style that he wants. But I think it'd be him and Carrick, Rooney ahead, and then Mkhitaryan, defensive abilities aside, he might end up starting one side, and then obviously Ibra up front and Martial on the left. A strong French influence though, but he'll be important for them this season.
Yeah, I think that's where he will end up in that role in the number 2. And I think, as you mentioned, Mkhitaryan didn't start the weekend. I think that might have been a slight clever move for squad-wise, because we do play on Friday. Well, I say we, I shouldn't really say that. Manchester United do play on Friday evening against Southampton, so it may be keeping some in the locker while still getting the result against Bournemouth at the weekend. There's been a lot of discussion, Eric, about the money involved in this transfer. Obviously, it's a world record fee regardless of how you place it. Some people say it's 83 up front. Some people are saying 89. Some people are putting on the add-ons, which can add up to 105 in some places, 145 million euros in some places. But we'll never get the exact fee. But is that a lot of money to pay for especially someone who's not going to grab you 30, 40 goals a season?
Again, as Adam just mentioned as well, I think there's more to this than the player's value on the pitch. It's a statement of intent. It's commercial value. It's Manchester United continuing to be, one of the biggest footballing brands in the world, and maybe even apropos to their football success. We saw this summer that Pogba's not really entirely comfortable playing in a 4-2-3-1, and I think that if Mourinho does want to persist with this, personally, I have serious doubts about that, about his efficacy there. Whether he's alongside Schneiderlin or Carrick or Fellaini or Herrera, whoever it is that partners him, if he is played as part of a central midfield partnership, I think his limitations in that role, in terms of knowing when to switch between defending and attacking, are still a little bit suspect. Is Mourinho a manager who's capable of continuing to mold Pogba and continuing to boost his abilities and to get him to be more effective in that role? I would certainly give him that much credit, but for the time being, I think that Manchester United could really undergo a little bit of a rocky road in terms of negotiating this.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make, Eric, and my confidence of having him in the two-man in that 4-2-3-1 is, we saw with France, it was predominantly with Blaise Matuidi next to him. He was also the same kind of player who wants to try and get forward. If he's next to someone like a Carrick or a Schneiderlin who's probably more inclined to stay back or even just completely hold that position for him, it will give him more license to move forward and backwards a little bit more freely without the pressures of staying back with someone advancing too far ahead of him. And the other thing that was mentioned, I think it was mentioned on Monday Night Football earlier tonight, which was Wayne Rooney might even drop into that midfield role should Pogba advance in front of him on occasion, or if in certain games maybe Rooney's tiring a little bit, or Pogba's feeling like he's on a roll or something like that maybe he might move into that area. So that might be something interesting to watch. But let's talk about more. To finish, let's talk maybe a bit more rounded about this. There's been talk of the impact on French football and transfers in general because of this. The worry might be that teams might start trying to, obviously Pogba came originally from Le Havre, and teams might try and do one better than they do at the moment, which is instead of buying established Ligue 1 talent, they're going to try and buy very cheap young Ligue 1, Ligue 2 talent that they can probably mould into that style of player and then have that kind of player in their ranks. Adam, is that a worry for French clubs in the near future, that teams might continue to try and really plunder their youth players?
I think it is. I think because for me, one of the best things about French football is it's a real proving ground. The players come through in both Ligue 1 and Ligue 2, and it's the right atmosphere for them to develop and succeed. There's so much talent in both divisions that they're given this opportunity, maybe because players are sold ahead of them. Those established names are sold ahead of them, and sort of mid-table to lower Ligue 1 clubs, Ligue 2 clubs don't go out and necessarily sign a replacement. They'll often promote from within. And it's that perfect atmosphere of the standard of the league. It suits. It's still one of the best five in Europe, in my opinion. But it's just at the right level for it to be challenging, but to not be overwhelming. And it suits those players coming through and allows them to develop. There's not too much pressure on them, perhaps at certain clubs. And if they get picked off early, then that opportunity disappears for them to play competitive first-team football in a good league. If they go to, say, someone from a Ligue 2 side is signed at 17 and goes to Chelsea, that opportunity for them to develop that real sort of that streetwise kind of aspect to their game, the technique, the pressure they're put under in professional football, that disappears. And the sanitized environment of a Premier League academy perhaps isn't the right place to develop as a footballer. In terms of what we've seen so far, when you think about the players that have come out of, especially of Ligue 2 and have moved on to Ligue 1 and moved on from there, I'm not sure that it helps. In one aspect, the whole thing with Pogba being signed by United as the biggest transfer of all time, it is good in one respect, is that a Frenchman is the most expensive player and possibly one of the most renowned players in the world. That's only good for the profile of French football. That he seemed to be this mercurial talent, and he's worth this amount of money, whatever United have paid. So on that aspect, it's good. But if it starts encouraging teams to sort of haul the talent from the lower divisions, it could be a worry looking ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing that. Look at Lys Mousset, look at Serhou Guirassy, look at Issa Mandi. I mean, I know Reims were in Ligue 1 last year, but those are three players off the top of my head. Look at Jean-Philippe Gbamin. Those are part of, I think, what's an increasingly worrying trend of teams looking to Ligue 2 for players. Before it was sort of a novelty. We'll sign a Yaya Sanogo or someone of that ilk and see what comes to them. But now, I think in this transfer window in particular that's currently open, we're seeing higher fees being paid. It makes it a lot harder for these Ligue 2 sides to turn things down. I mean, Mousset was sold for, I believe, 6.5–7 million euros. No team in Ligue 1 spent that much on a single player outside of Monaco and PSG, with the exception of Marseille's purchase of Remy Cabella. So what you're doing by injecting that sort of money into Ligue 2 is you're completely bypassing Ligue 1 teams. And whereas you might have a player like, say, Kevin Gamero coming from Strasbourg to Lorient, having a couple of seasons of success there, getting them knocking at the door of Europe, an established Ligue 1 team, and then Lorient selling him on for a profit. Now, today's Kevin Gamero, whoever that would be, if it's Lys Mousset, for example, there's going to be no benefit to Ligue 1, and I think that has a knock-on effect of lowering the overall quality in the division, and that manifests itself, I think, further in the way that the league's coefficients negatively affected in Europe. If you have a lower overall standard of play in the league due to a talent drain, then the teams that are going to get into Europe are going to be of lower quality, and the league's coefficient is going to suffer. And that in turn reduces the money available to the league through the TV rights, the Champions League, et cetera, et cetera. And this could potentially have a really deleterious effect. I mean, let's look at the example of, say, the Netherlands, where they were 10 years ago with PSG and Ajax consistently in the knockout rounds, and now we see, how many players are being brought in from the Dutch league to England and to Serie A and to other leagues around the world. The Dutch league has firmly a reputation now as a quote-unquote feeder league, while the Dutch teams continue to produce exciting young attacking talents, the overall level of quality of play in that league has declined, and now the Dutch league only has 1.5 Champions League spots, whereas before it had more than that. They were one of the definitively the top 6 or 7 leagues in the world. If clubs in France can't take a holistic look at this, it's a really, really dangerous precedent. I think we have to really take a long, hard look at what the potential ramifications for moves like the ones I just mentioned, Mousset, Gbamin, Guirassy, how that could really affect the league down the road.
Yeah, and the great successes of Riyad Mahrez and the likes of N'Golo Kante would have helped feed that extra machine of you can get players on the cheap from areas in France and add to your team. But it's a major issue that unfortunately we can do nothing about. But we'll finish on a slightly negative note, unfortunately. But that's all from us this week. My thanks to Eric, Adam, and all of you listening at home. Take heart, though, everyone that lost this weekend. There are still 37 weeks to get everything right if your team can. We shall see you same time next week. A bientôt and farewell.